This was Xinhua Special, and I'm Helen Bentley. See you next time.
Helen, wait. How many places in China have you been to this year?
I see, so the tables have turned, have they? It's the interviewer becoming the interviewee. Oh gosh, let's think. Beijing, Hebei, Shanxi, Fujian, Chongqing, other places. I can't remember. Over the past year, in my role as a correspondent for Xinhua, I've travelled from the vast open grasslands of Inner Mongolia to the energetic trade hub of Xiamen. I've drunk baijiu with ethnic Miao in tiny mountain villages and eaten hot pot overlooking the Yangtze River with government officials. I even went back to school in Ningxia and experienced red tourism in Shanxi. I was the first foreigner to report on the National Congress of the Communist Party of China for Xinhua, and I was so close to Xi Jinping on one occasion that I was able to get a photograph of him. It was just a shame that I only got his feet in focus. So the past year has really introduced me to a completely different side of China. You know, I used to say to all my friends back home, oh, I'm living in China now, don't you know? But I wasn't, not really. You know, I live in a cosmopolitan city, Beijing, which aside from all the Chinese character signage everywhere, it could be anywhere else in the world.
You have traveled a lot. What were the highlights?
Can transportation be a highlight? Because I'd say that was one of the best things I've done this year. I've done almost every single mode of transportation in China. Trains, planes, boats, bikes, even a horse, which I fell off. Yeah, they were absolutely amazing experiences, and actually you can trace them back to the Belt and Road Forum, which was in May. And in preparation for the forum, we made a video and I got on a bike. This video was shot in Hebei, which is next to Beijing, and despite it not being on the Silk Road, it had all of the scenery of the ancient trade route. Ports, grassland, deserts, urban areas, traditional architecture. I mean, you can see.
Any standout event?
So in this March, myself and a colleague were the first foreign correspondents to be sent by Xinhua to report on the two sessions. There we are, hi Mo, you okay? And this was a really historic event, and it meant lots of late nights and lots of early mornings and queues. Oh, so many queues. Every year, journalists from across the world line up outside the Great Hall of the People for the annual report on the work of the government to be released. And when I arrived that day at 7 a.m, people had already been queuing since 4:30. And this fine blanket of rain began to fall, and my mood was as grey as the sky when I found out that the doors wouldn't even open for another hour.
You also covered the party congress, right?
I did, actually, and I sat in the very front row of the press conference when the new leadership was announced. And there's this photo, which is this one here, which was everywhere for a while. It was in print, it was in press, and it was even on the subway. And here's me just down here. And you know, I think sometimes when I look back on my career, what is my lasting memory going to be? Is it the fact that the back of my unbrushed hair is going to have been seen by millions?
What was the most moving topic?
I'd say this one, please. Poverty alleviation. It's one of the most important things that China's doing at the moment, especially as China's only got 2 more years left to lift all of its rural poor above the poverty line. I was lucky enough to see how some of these measures are being rolled out across the country this year. For one of these reports, I went back to school with students in Ningxia. Many of the students I met there said that they saw their futures in the city, but not as migrant workers, as this next wave of workers are going to be armed with qualifications and, more importantly, ideas.
Are there any memorable stories?
Oh, I tell you what, if I had to choose an individual, it would be Xi Jinping. I mean, it's really been his year, hasn't it? If you think about it, he started off the year advising people in rural areas on poverty alleviation measures, and by the end, he'd been re-elected General Secretary of the party and had his guiding ideology written into the party's constitution. In fact, he visited the country's top news outlets, which of course one was Xinhua, And when he was at Xinhua, he praised the agency for its multimedia services and encouraged all the journalists to be more down to earth in their reporting. And in hindsight, all the roads that I've travelled this year can be traced back to that very inspection tour. So in exploring how better to tell China's stories, Xinhua started to look at its foreign employees for guidance, but also for involvement. And that's where I came in. And it's been an absolute privilege to experience these changes firsthand in China, and to have a front row seat is an amazing opportunity, even if I don't always brush my hair. See you next year.